The sun hung high over the dusty Texas town, its heat beating down mercilessly on the weathered wooden boards of the old saloon porch where a fresh sheet of paper had just been nailed. The words were simple, written in a bold, no-nonsense hand: hiring, ranch cook, apply at noon. Honest hands needed, meals, pay, and roof provided. Folks in town hardly paid attention, used to such notices coming and going, but for one woman, the ink on that page carried the weight of survival itself. Clara Dawson stood at the edge of the street, her arms heavy with her youngest child who whimpered against her shoulder, while the two older ones clung to the hem of her worn calico dress. Her husband had been gone for near 2 winters now, claimed by fever, buried on a hillside where the wind never stopped moaning, and the small patch of land they once called home had dried up under drought and debt. Clara had fought, prayed, and begged the Lord for strength, but each day she watched her children's faces grow thinner, their bellies tighter with hunger, and she knew she was running out of time. The notice wasn't meant for a woman, she was certain of that. Ranches needed strong men with broad backs to work cattle, not widows carrying 3 children and a cast-iron pan of hope. But cooking, now that was something she knew. Her mother had raised her over a wood stove, and Clara could make a stew stretch for days, could knead bread till it fed a crowd, could even make a scrap of beef taste like a feast. Cooking was her one card left to play. So, at the stroke of noon, while dust swirled in the street and a few curious townsfolk lingered, Clara tightened her shawl, pushed a stray lock of red hair behind her ear, and marched her little brood right up to that notice. Standing beneath it was the man who had posted it, a tall, broad-shouldered rancher with a face roughened by sun and wind. His hat shadowed his eyes, but she could feel the weight of his gaze as he looked from her to the children. He had expected some grizzled drifter, or a trail cook with scars of 1,000 campfires, not a young woman with freckles and a determined set to her jaw. "Ma'am," he said slowly, his voice low, cautious as though not to spook her. "This here post was meant for a cook." "Not," Clara cut him off, her voice steady though her heart thundered in her chest. "I can cook, better than most men you'll find between here and Abilene. My children and I, we don't need much, just work, food, and a place to lay our heads. You won't regret hiring me." For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the cry of her baby and the whisper of dust across the boards. Behind him, 2 ranch hands smirked, muttering something about a widow in the kitchen, but the rancher lifted his hand and silenced them with a glare. He studied Clara, not just her face but the fire in her eyes, the stubborn way she held her ground when every bone in her body must have been trembling.
He knew desperation when he
saw it, but he also knew grit. "Name's Matthew Cole," he said finally, shifting his weight. "I run the Broken Spur Ranch. It's no place for the faint-hearted. Days start before dawn and end when the cattle quit their bawling. You sure you're up for that?" Clara straightened her back, adjusting her baby on her hip. "Mr. Cole, I buried my husband with my own 2 hands. I've walked miles with nothing but my children's hunger pushing me forward. If you think I can't handle an early morning in a kitchen fire, then you don't know me." A faint smile tugged at Matthew's lips despite himself. The woman was bold, braver than half the men he'd hired who quit after a week. He gave a slow nod. "Fine then. You start tomorrow. But hear me clear, Mrs. Dawson." "Clara Dawson." "Mrs. Dawson, I ain't hiring you out of pity. You work, you stay. You don't, you go. My men'll eat 3 times a day and they'll eat hearty. You can handle that, then welcome aboard." Relief washed over Clara, so strong she thought her knees might buckle, but she kept her chin high and nodded. "I'll do more than handle it. You'll see." As the ranch hands chuckled and shook their heads, Clara gathered her children and followed Matthew toward the waiting wagon. Behind her, the town watched with curiosity, whispers already starting. A widow with 3 children stepping onto the Broken Spur was bound to stir talk, but Clara didn't care. For the first time in months, her children's future wasn't empty. For the first time in months, hope rode beside her on that wagon toward the sprawling land of the ranch. Yet deep down she sensed this was only the beginning. The first morning at the Broken Spur dawned gray with mist, rolling off the grasslands, and Clara was already awake when the rooster crowed. She had barely slept, her nerves prickling with both fear and determination. Her children lay curled on cots in the small room Matthew had set aside for them inside the bunkhouse kitchen, and Clara kissed each of their foreheads before stoking the fire. She had flour, salt, beans, and a side of bacon, more food than she'd seen in her pantry for months. Her hands moved with purpose, measuring, kneading, frying, until the smell of biscuits and sizzling meat filled the air. Ranch hands drifted in, grumbling and yawning, only to stop short at the sight of the spread laid before them. Plates clattered, mugs filled with coffee, and for the first time silence fell over the rough-talking cowboys as they ate. They ate as though they hadn't tasted real food in weeks, and Clara stood back with her baby on her hip, watching satisfaction spread across the table. Matthew Cole appeared last, his presence filling the room as surely as the sunrise. He said nothing at first, just poured himself coffee and sampled a biscuit. He chewed slowly, then looked up at Clara with a single nod that meant more than words. She had passed the first test, but passing the test didn't end the challenges. Day by day, Clara fought. Against exhaustion, against whispers from the ranch hands who said women had no place in their world, against her own fears that she might not last. Yet each day, she rose earlier, cooked better, and worked harder, her children learning to help where they could. The little girl washed dishes, the boy carried wood, and even the baby grew, quieter as if sensing their survival depended on their mother's strength. Weeks rolled into months, and Clara's presence became more than just tolerated, it became essential. The men who once scoffed now respected her, some even smiling as she scolded them for tracking mud into her clean kitchen. Her meals filled their bellies. Her firmness kept them in line, and her spirit warmed the cold ranch house like no fire ever could. And all the while Matthew watched. He watched the way Clara never complained, the way she looked her hardships in the eye and never flinched. He saw the way her children thrived under her care, their cheeks fuller, their laughter returning. He began to linger longer in the kitchen, offering to chop wood or mend a broken latch. And though Clara never asked for his help, she found herself grateful for his quiet strength. One evening after a long day of driving cattle, Matthew stood at the doorway of the kitchen, dust still on his boots. Clara was bent over the table, her hair loose, her cheeks flushed from the fire. The children slept nearby, their soft breaths the only sound. Matthew cleared his throat and she looked up, startled. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in the golden lamplight. "You've done more than cook for this ranch," he said quietly, his voice thick with meaning. "You've given it a heart. You've given it life." Clara's eyes glistened, though she quickly looked down, fussing with the apron at her waist. She wasn't ready to speak of feelings, not when grief still lingered in her chest, but something deep inside her stirred at his words, something she hadn't felt in years, hope, not just for survival but for belonging. The journey that began with a desperate notice at noon had turned into something neither of them expected. For Clara, it was the salvation of her children. For Matthew, it was the spark that reminded him life was more than work and dust. And though the road ahead would not be easy, they both knew that sometimes the strongest families were not the ones you were born into but the ones you built together, nail by nail, meal by meal, day by day.